Elite coworker threw coke at a black woman at work, then found out she was the CEO's wife. The day was just beginning like any other at the corporate office, where the usual mix of high-powered professionals moved through their workspaces, typing away on their computers and rushing to meetings. The building itself was tall, its windows reflecting the rising sun as it pierced through the clouds. Inside, the atmosphere was crisp, a blend of ambition and sharp minds working toward success. It was a world where reputation mattered more than anything, and every move was calculated with precision. Among the employees of this prestigious company, there was one figure who stood out, not for her position, but for her quiet presence. Maya was a woman who seemed to glide through the office unnoticed by most, yet with a calm confidence that made people take second glances. She wasn't the loud type. Maya wasn't someone who sought attention, nor did she try to make waves in the workplace. Instead, she was always poised, calm, and professional. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her clothes were always immaculate, and her posture spoke volumes. But there was something about her that made people look twice, wondering who she was and what role she played in the company. It wasn't that she didn't speak or contribute, rather she did so with purpose. Maya knew how to read a room, how to make the right comments at the right time, and how to support her colleagues when necessary. Despite her calm demeanor, Maya was sharp. Her intellect was undeniable, but it was a trait few truly understood. Most people at the company had no idea of her connection to Richard, the CEO. To them, she was just another employee. Then there was Kyle. He was a senior manager, well-respected by his peers, and someone who had built his career with a sharp edge. Kyle's reputation was everything. His success in the company was a product of his hard work and ambition. He believed in the power of being at the top, where everyone looked up to you and listened to your every word. To him, it was the only place to be, the best place. Kyle was accustomed to getting what he wanted and had a tendency to treat others as if they were simply stepping stones on his path to even greater success. On this particular day, a major project was being discussed in the boardroom. The tension was high. Everyone in the meeting had an opinion, and as the conversation swirled around the room, the air thickened with frustration. Kyle, who had been pushing his ideas all morning, was getting increasingly agitated. He was used to people agreeing with him, following his lead. But this time, things weren't going his way. As the discussion wore on, Maya, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Her voice was calm, yet firm, as she presented a counterpoint to Kyle's ideas. It wasn't an attack, but simply a different perspective. For Kyle, that was all it took to make him snap. His temper, which he usually kept in check, flared up. Maya's suggestion, though reasonable, felt like a challenge to him. It was one thing to be disagreed with in a board meeting, but it was another thing entirely when it was someone like Maya, someone he barely knew. In a moment of misplaced anger, Kyle stood up suddenly, knocking his chair back with a loud clatter. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. His face flushed with irritation, Kyle's eyes locked onto Maya's, and in a burst of frustration he grabbed a can of Coke from the table. Without thinking, he hurled it at her. The can flew through the air in a blur of silver, and in what felt like slow motion, it hit its mark, Maya's chest. The soda splashed across her clothes, leaving a dark stain on her blouse. It was a humiliating moment, one that left the entire room in stunned silence. The impact of the Coke was enough to break the tension, but not in the way Kyle had hoped. Maya didn't move at first. The shock of the situation hung in the air, but she remained calm. Her expression didn't change. She simply stood there, taking a deep breath before she gently wiped the soda from her blouse with a napkin, her movements precise, controlled. Kyle's smug expression slowly faltered, but he quickly recovered, laughing off his action as if it was some sort of joke. He waved it away, trying to brush the incident under the rug. To him, it was no big deal, just a little mishap, something that didn't warrant further attention. But others weren't so sure. Some of the employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of how to react. There was an unspoken tension in the room as everyone began to process what had just happened. Kyle, however, wasn't bothered. He had made his point. He thought it was over. Maya, on the other hand, said nothing. She didn't shout, didn't demand an apology, and didn't even seem upset. She simply turned and walked out of the room. Her calm departure left a lingering silence behind her. No one spoke immediately. The employees in the room were left to reflect on what had just occurred, their minds racing with questions. Why had Kyle acted so recklessly? Was Maya really just a random employee, or was there something more to her than they had realized? As Maya left the meeting, she didn't look back. She knew that the situation would not go unnoticed. She had been humiliated, but in a way, she didn't mind. Maya had seen how Kyle treated others before, and while she knew the incident was unprofessional, she didn't need to stoop to his level. She simply chose not to engage with his antics. Instead, she would let time and the inevitable consequences of his actions do the talking. Back in the office, the rumors started immediately. Some employees whispered to each other about the shocking incident. Kyle's behavior seemed out of character for the normally composed senior manager. There were murmurs about whether Maya would make a formal complaint, about how this would affect Kyle's career, and whether the company's upper management would even take it seriously. Some people believed that it would all blow over, but others were certain that Maya's quiet nature was hiding something more. They wondered if there would be consequences for Kyle's actions, or if he would simply brush it off as another day in his life. Little did anyone know, the truth was about to come to light in a way that no one could have predicted. The following day, the office felt different. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, one that nobody could ignore. People moved around with a sense of quiet uncertainty. Whispers filled the air, but no one had the courage to bring up the incident directly. Everyone had witnessed it, but now it was as though no one wanted to address it. Instead, they simply went about their work, each person unsure of what the future might hold for them, or for Kyle. As for Maya, she walked into the office as if nothing had happened. She was calm, composed, and focused, her usual quiet confidence back in place. There was no sign of distress in her demeanor. She made her way to her desk, sitting down to catch up on her emails, answering messages as if her world hadn't been shaken just hours before. Her grace was remarkable. Maya didn't allow herself to be defined by the actions of others, no matter how disrespectful. She simply did her job, and she did it well. But deep down, she knew that something needed to be done. Kyle's actions were unacceptable, and while she wasn't the type to cause a scene, she wasn't about to let the matter slide without some resolution. At the same time, Kyle was trying to go about his business as usual, but things were different for him now. As the day went on, he could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. His colleagues had started to look at him differently. Some of them avoided eye contact, while others seemed to keep their distance. The friendly chats in the break room had turned into awkward silences when he entered. People were clearly unsettled, and though he tried to brush it off, Kyle couldn't help but feel the discomfort in the air. He had always been a man who thrived on control, on the power that came with his position. But in that moment, after what he had done to Maya, he began to realize just how fragile that control really was. The uncomfortable stares, the soft murmurs behind his back, these things were new to him, and they were eating away at his confidence. Kyle was used to being at the top, respected and admired, but now he was starting to feel the sting of his own arrogance. The incident had put a crack in his armor, and it was growing wider with every passing minute. In the early afternoon, as the office buzzed with activity, Richard, the CEO, walked in. His tall frame and commanding presence seemed to quiet the room almost immediately. His eyes scanned the office, taking in the usual hustle of employees, but something was different about his expression today. He didn't look at Maya directly, but his eyes lingered for just a second longer than usual. There was an air of seriousness around him, one that none of the employees had seen before. His usually calm demeanor was replaced with something more intense. He moved through the office with purpose, not stopping to chat with anyone, as he usually did. Kyle, who had been deep in conversation with a colleague, quickly noticed Richard's arrival. He straightened up, his posture stiffening. For a moment, it felt as though the entire office was holding its breath. What was going on? Kyle thought. Richard didn't often make rounds like this. His visits were typically reserved for meetings or important discussions. And today, it was clear that something important was happening. Before Kyle could make his way over to Richard, the CEO's voice rang out, calling for him to meet him in his office. "Kyle, please come to my office now." It wasn't a question, it wasn't a request, it was an order, and it left Kyle feeling uneasy. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way toward Richard's office, his heart pounding with each step. The other employees looked on, curious and nervous, knowing that something was about to unfold that they hadn't expected. Inside Richard's office, Kyle found himself standing awkwardly in front of the CEO's desk. Richard was sitting behind it, his hands folded together, his face unreadable. There was no warmth in his expression, no sign of the usual friendly rapport they shared. "Kyle," Richard began, his voice calm but with an edge of seriousness that made Kyle uneasy. "Do you know why I've called you in here today?" Kyle swallowed hard. "I'm not sure, sir," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though he felt the unease in his stomach. He knew something wasn't right. There was no way this meeting was about the project he had been working on. No, this was something far more significant. Richard leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Kyle's with a gaze that felt sharp enough to pierce through him. "I'm sure you're aware of the incident that took place yesterday, and you must know, Kyle, that this behavior is completely unacceptable." Kyle's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, trying to think of a response, but words seemed to fail him. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "You threw a Coke at one of our employees, Kyle," Richard continued, his voice still calm but firm. "Not just any employee, but a woman who's shown nothing but professionalism and grace. I will not tolerate that kind of disrespect in my company." Richard paused for a moment, his gaze unwavering. The silence that followed felt deafening. Kyle felt his pulse quicken. He had hoped this would be forgotten, that everyone would just move on, but that clearly wasn't the case. He had made a mistake, a big one, but it wasn't just any mistake. It was one that had consequences. "I know that sometimes in the heat of the moment people act out of frustration," Richard said, his voice softening slightly. "But I've always expected better from you. You're one of our senior managers, someone who's been here for years. I thought you understood what this company stands for: respect, professionalism, and teamwork." Kyle's mind raced as Richard spoke. He was trying to find a way to apologize, but he wasn't sure where to begin. The truth was, he was embarrassed. He had let his anger get the best of him, and now he was facing the consequences. Worse still, he had no idea who this woman really was. No idea that she wasn't just another employee in the company. Richard paused, as if waiting for Kyle to speak, but there was nothing left for Kyle to say. The words he wanted to express, apologies, regret, explanations, felt hollow in his throat. How could he explain his actions without sounding like he was making excuses? Finally, Richard leaned back in his chair. "I don't know what you were thinking, Kyle, but I can tell you this. Maya is not just any employee here. She's the wife of our CEO." Kyle's eyes widened in shock. He stared at Richard, trying to process the words that had just left his mouth. The CEO's wife? The room felt like it was spinning. Kyle's mind was reeling, the realization of what he had done hitting him harder than any reprimand could. He had thrown a Coke at the CEO's wife, a woman who had been in the office, silently supporting her husband's vision for the company. No one had told him who she was. No one had made it clear that she was more than just a random face in the office. Richard's gaze softened, but there was still no mistaking the weight of his words. "I expect you to take full responsibility for this, Kyle, and there will be consequences. You don't treat people like that, not here, not anywhere." Kyle stood there, stunned, unable to form a response. The impact of his actions had just set in, and there was no escaping the truth. He had messed up. The next morning, the office was full of buzz. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The news of Kyle's outburst had already spread throughout the company. But there was something more, a deep undercurrent of curiosity, confusion, and even a hint of nervous excitement. No one knew exactly what would come of the incident, but they all knew that things would never be the same again. As usual, Maya arrived at the office just as the sun began to rise. She walked into the building with the same quiet elegance that she always carried, her stride purposeful but not rushed. She was dressed impeccably, as usual, with her hair neatly pulled back, and she didn't look at all out of place. She greeted the security guard at the entrance with a nod, passing by the front desk as she made her way upstairs to her office. But unlike the day before, this time, there was something different about her. There was a calmness in her demeanor that seemed to quiet the room. The employees who had witnessed her leave the meeting yesterday with nothing but grace couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman she really was. Who was she? What role did she really play in the company? Though she had always been a figure of quiet authority, there had been an air of mystery around her, one that no one had ever questioned. Now, however, that mystery was starting to unravel. Kyle, on the other hand, was a mess. He had spent the entire night replaying the events of the day before in his head. What had he done? How could he have let his anger take control like that? The more he thought about it, the more embarrassed he became. He had no idea who Maya was, and now he realized that his outburst could have cost him everything. He had always prided himself on his career and his reputation within the company. His position as a senior manager was something he had worked hard for, and yet in one reckless moment, it seemed as though he had destroyed it all. As Kyle walked through the office that morning, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. The usual nods and handshakes had turned into silent stares, and it made him feel like a complete outsider. He was used to being in control, but now he felt out of place, as if the respect he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. He tried to act normal to put on a brave face, but inside he was drowning in regret. The company's CEO, Richard, had made it clear that he would be speaking with Maya privately that morning. Kyle tried to brush it off, but the knot in his stomach grew tighter. He had no idea what was going on, but one thing was certain: he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. For the most part, the office carried on with its usual hustle. But as the hours passed, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation. People kept glancing toward Richard's office, where he and Maya had been for the last hour. No one knew what they were discussing, but the mystery only deepened with each passing minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to Richard's office opened. Maya stepped out, her posture as confident as ever. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, something that no one could quite put their finger on. She nodded politely to the few employees in the hallway before walking down the corridor toward her desk, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Kyle, who had been pacing in his office, couldn't help but glance over at her as she passed. He was waiting for her to make eye contact, to acknowledge the mess he had made. But she didn't even look his way. She kept walking with her usual calm confidence, as if the events of yesterday had never occurred. The silence in the office was thick, and it felt as though the entire building was holding its breath. For a moment, it seemed like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Would Maya finally speak out about what had happened? Would she confront Kyle? But she did nothing. She simply went about her day as if nothing had changed, sitting at her desk, responding to emails and reviewing reports. Kyle stood frozen for a moment, confused. Was that it? Had she already forgiven him, or had she simply chosen to move on from it all? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been let off too easily. After everything that had happened, he had expected some sort of confrontation. But instead, Maya had chosen to remain quiet, to stay focused on her work. He watched her for a moment longer before sighing deeply and turning back to his own desk. The feeling of unease in his stomach hadn't gone away. If anything, it had only grown stronger. Later in the afternoon, Richard called for a company-wide meeting. As the employees gathered in the conference room, there was a sense of tension in the air. No one spoke, but everyone's eyes were on the CEO as he walked to the front of the room. Richard, standing tall in front of the room, cleared his throat before addressing the employees. "Good afternoon, everyone," Richard began, his voice steady and confident. "I know many of you are aware of the incident that occurred yesterday, and while I have already spoken to Kyle about his actions, I wanted to take a moment to address the matter with all of you." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the CEO. No one dared to interrupt. "I expect professionalism from everyone who works here, regardless of your position or rank. Yesterday's actions were completely out of line, and I want to make it clear that such behavior will not be tolerated in this company. There is no place for disrespect, no matter who it is directed at," Richard continued. Kyle shifted in his seat, the weight of the words making him uncomfortable. He could feel the heat of shame creeping up his neck. Richard paused, letting the words settle before he continued. "I also want to take this opportunity to clear up any confusion. Maya, who many of you have seen around the office, is not just another employee. She is my wife, and she has been an important part of this company for many years." There was a brief pause as the revelation hit the room. The employees exchanged surprised glances, some of them clearly shocked by the news. "Maya has been supporting the company in ways that many of you will never know," Richard said. "Her work has always been integral to our success, and I expect all of you to respect her as you would any other member of the team." Kyle felt his stomach drop. This was it, the moment of truth. He realized that he had thrown coke at the CEO's wife, someone who had been working behind the scenes, shaping the company's future. The realization made him sick. He had no idea who Maya really was, and now the consequences of his actions were staring him in the face. As the meeting continued, Kyle couldn't focus on the words coming from Richard's mouth. His mind was racing, and his thoughts were consumed by guilt. He had thrown a can of soda at someone who had been more powerful than he had ever imagined. After the meeting, the office was filled with whispers again. Some employees were still processing the shock of Richard's announcement, while others seemed to look at Maya with newfound respect. But Maya herself didn't seem affected. She was still going about her work with the same calm confidence that had always defined her. She had been silent through it all, silent through Kyle's actions, through Richard's words, and through the gossip that swirled around the office. And Kyle, now fully aware of the weight of his mistake, couldn't help but wonder. Had he underestimated Maya all along? The days following the company-wide meeting felt like a blur to Kyle. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, embarrassment, and regret. The moment he learned that Maya was the CEO's wife, he had hoped that somehow the incident would blow over, that his actions would be forgotten. But that wasn't how things worked in this company, not anymore. For the first time, Kyle truly understood the weight of what he had done. Maya was not just any employee. She was a powerful figure in the company, a person whose influence extended far beyond what anyone had realized. The respect she commanded from the upper management was evident, and the fact that she had remained silent throughout everything made Kyle feel even smaller. Maya, on the other hand, continued to work as though nothing had changed. She was calm, composed, and focused. Her desk remained orderly, and her emails were answered promptly. She engaged with her colleagues, offering quiet advice when needed, but always in a manner that was both respectful and distant. It was as if she had decided that the incident had no bearing on her work. Maya wasn't going to let it affect her. She was above it. This wasn't to say that Maya wasn't hurt by Kyle's actions. She had been disrespected after all. But Maya wasn't the type to show her emotions easily. She had always been the type to take everything in stride, to move forward with grace and poise. And so she did. But she was far from naive. She knew that the incident would have consequences for Kyle, and she had made the choice not to engage with him further. As for Kyle, the tension in the office was growing more unbearable with each passing day. His colleagues were still whispering behind his back. He could feel their eyes on him whenever he walked by. They all knew what had happened, and they knew that the consequences would follow. But it wasn't just the others that he had to worry about now. Richard, the CEO, had made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate such behavior, and Kyle was all too aware that he was on thin ice. There were moments when Kyle thought he might be fired. After all, who throws a can of Coke at the CEO's wife and expects no consequences? But Richard hadn't taken such drastic action yet. Instead, he had given Kyle the chance to redeem himself. That was something that haunted Kyle day and night. How could he redeem himself after such a careless act? Could he somehow undo the damage he had caused? One afternoon, as Kyle sat at his desk, trying to focus on the reports in front of him, he received an unexpected email. It was from Richard, the CEO. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the subject line, "Meeting Request." For a moment, Kyle froze. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. He had been expecting this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't shake the feeling that his career at the company was hanging by a thread. Taking a deep breath, Kyle opened the email. It was short and to the point. "Please come to my office at 3 p.m. today. We need to discuss the situation. Richard." Kyle's palms grew sweaty as he read the words. The time was set, and there was no turning back now. He knew that this meeting would be the moment that decided his future. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The rest of the afternoon dragged on. Every minute felt like an eternity as Kyle tried to distract himself with work. But nothing could shake the feeling of impending doom. His thoughts kept returning to the same question. What would Richard say? Would he be fired on the spot? Or would he be given a second chance? Finally, the clock struck 3 p.m. With his heart pounding in his chest, Kyle stood up and made his way to Richard's office. Each step felt heavy, as though the weight of his mistakes was pressing down on him. When he arrived at the door, he took one last deep breath before knocking. "Come in," Richard's voice called from inside. Kyle opened the door slowly and stepped into the CEO's office. Richard was sitting behind his large wooden desk, his usual composed expression firmly in place. The office was elegant and modern, with sleek furniture and large windows offering a view of the city skyline. But today, the room felt cold and intimidating. Richard motioned for Kyle to sit down, and he did, nervously adjusting his tie as he sat. "Kyle," Richard began, his voice calm yet firm, "I wanted to meet with you to discuss your actions from last week." Kyle nodded, his throat dry. He wasn't sure what to say. What could he say? He had already apologized in his mind 1,000 times, but now, with Richard's gaze on him, the words wouldn't come. "I've had a chance to think about the situation," Richard continued. "And after speaking with Maya, I've decided that I don't believe this is a matter for immediate termination. However, there will be consequences. I need you to understand that what you did was completely unacceptable. It goes against everything this company stands for." Kyle's heart sank as he listened to Richard's words. He had hoped for a second chance, but the weight of the situation was becoming clear. There was no escaping the fact that his actions had consequences. "I've spoken with Maya about the incident," Richard said, his tone softening just slightly. "She's chosen to handle this quietly, which is why I'm giving you the opportunity to make amends. But I need to be clear. If this happens again, there will be no more chances. You'll be out of this company for good." Kyle's mind was racing. He could barely process the words that were being said. He had been given a chance, but it was up to him to prove that he was worthy of it. Richard looked at Kyle for a moment before speaking again. "I expect you to make things right with Maya, not just for the company's sake, but for your own. You owe her an apology, and I suggest you take the time to do that. I'm not going to make any further decisions until I see that you've taken responsibility for your actions." Kyle nodded, his hands trembling. "I understand, sir. I'll make things right." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Kyle for a moment before speaking once more. "Good. I believe in second chances, Kyle, but you have to show me that you deserve it. The next steps are in your hands." With that, Richard stood up and extended his hand to Kyle. He took it, feeling a wave of relief mixed with nervous anticipation. As Kyle left the office, the weight of the conversation still heavy in his mind, he knew one thing for certain. His time at the company had just changed forever. He had been given a second chance, but he couldn't waste it. Now the real work began. The following days were a blur of mixed emotions for Kyle. Every morning he walked into the office, he could feel the weight of his past actions hanging over him like a dark cloud. His colleagues had started to treat him differently, some with cold indifference, others with quiet judgment. He no longer held the same confidence he once did, and he could feel the distance growing between him and the people he had worked alongside for years. His focus at work had diminished. His usual sharpness, the drive that had made him one of the top managers, was now clouded by regret. Every decision he made felt like it was being scrutinized, not just by his superiors, but by everyone around him. He could feel their eyes on him, whether it was in the break room, the hallways, or even during meetings. He knew that they were all aware of what had happened, and it made every moment in the office uncomfortable. But the hardest part was still to come: Maya. She remained a constant in his thoughts, and every time their paths crossed in the office, Kyle felt a knot in his stomach. He had humiliated her, treated her as if she was insignificant, and the reality of that was starting to settle in. The worst part was, Maya had done nothing to deserve it. She was not just another employee. She was someone who deserved respect, someone who had been an important part of the company for years. And yet, he had treated her like an afterthought. It was clear now that if he was going to save his job, and possibly his dignity, he had to make amends. He had to apologize, not just for the incident itself, but for the way he had made Maya feel. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He had acted rashly, and there was no simple way to take back the damage he had done. But he had to try. The day came when Kyle gathered enough courage to finally approach Maya. He had been avoiding her for days, unsure of what to say, how to say it, or if she even wanted to hear his apology. But today, something inside him told him that he couldn't put it off any longer. Kyle found Maya sitting at her desk, her back straight as she typed away at her computer. Her focus was intense, but there was still something graceful about her. The way she worked, the way she carried herself, it was impossible to ignore. But it was more than that. It was the way she made everything seem effortless, even in the face of adversity. He admired that, but also resented the fact that he hadn't seen it before. He walked up to her desk, hesitating for a moment. Maya didn't look up, but he could see the subtle shift in her posture as she realized he was there. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice calm and composed. Kyle, she said, her tone neutral, but there was a hint of something else there, a quiet strength that Kyle hadn't fully appreciated until now. What can I do for you? Her question was simple, but Kyle could feel the weight behind it. It was the same question she had probably been asking herself for days. Why had he done what he did? And why was he suddenly standing in front of her now after everything that had happened? For a moment, Kyle struggled to find his words. He had rehearsed this apology in his head over and over again, but now that he was finally here, it felt like all the words had evaporated. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Maya, His voice faltered for a moment, but he pressed on. I owe you an apology. What I did, throwing that can at you, treating you the way I did, it was completely wrong. I had no right to act that way. You didn't deserve any of it. He paused, watching her closely, waiting for her response. Maya didn't say anything right away. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were steady, but there was something else behind them, a quiet understanding, perhaps even a sense of acceptance. I know that an apology won't fix what happened, Kyle continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. But I want you to know that I regret what I did. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely out of line, and I take full responsibility for it. Maya looked up at him then, her gaze piercing but not with anger. It wasn't the fiery look that Kyle had feared. Instead, it was calm, almost thoughtful. She didn't say anything for a long moment, which made Kyle even more anxious. But then, finally, she spoke. I appreciate your apology, Kyle, she said quietly. But what's important now is how you move forward. You can apologize all you want, but actions speak louder than words. You need to prove to me and to everyone else that you've learned from this. Kyle's heart sank. Maya wasn't going to make this easy for him, and rightly so. He had earned her respect through his actions, and now he had to earn it back. I will prove it, Kyle said, his voice firm. I know I can't undo what happened, but I can show you that I'm better than what I did. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Maya didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes. Maybe it was a flicker of hope, or maybe it was just the acknowledgement that Kyle had finally taken responsibility. Either way, it was enough to reassure him that he was on the right path. We'll see, Kyle, Maya said, her voice still calm but with a hint of warmth. Just remember, actions, not words. With that, she returned to her work as if the conversation had never happened. Kyle stood there for a moment longer, watching her, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. He had taken the first step, but it was only the beginning. As he left her desk, Kyle felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He wasn't going to let this mistake define him. He had to prove to himself, to Maya, and to everyone else in the company that he was capable of change. Over the next few weeks, Kyle worked harder than ever before. He threw himself into his projects, making sure to give his best effort at everything he did. He worked with his team, helping them when they needed it, and showing them that he was willing to earn their trust again. The most important thing, however, was his relationship with Maya. Every interaction with her was a chance to show that he had learned from his mistakes. Slowly but surely, the tension that had once existed between them began to fade. While things would never be the same, there was a sense of mutual respect growing. Kyle knew that he had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The weeks that followed were a turning point for Kyle. He knew that gaining back his reputation and earning Maya's respect would take time, but he was determined. Every morning, he walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. No longer did he let the fear of judgment control him. Instead, he focused on doing his best. It wasn't just about proving others wrong anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above his mistakes. At first, his colleagues were hesitant. It was hard to forget the way Kyle had acted, but slowly they began to notice the change. He was no longer the arrogant senior manager who kept to himself, who belittled others to maintain his position. Instead, Kyle was now the team player, always ready to offer a hand when someone needed help, always willing to listen to others' opinions. His attitude had shifted, and people started to appreciate it. However, the real challenge for Kyle lay in his relationship with Maya. He couldn't ignore the fact that his actions had not only affected her, but had left a lasting mark. Maya wasn't someone who wore her emotions on her sleeve, but Kyle knew that earning back her trust was not going to be easy. She had been nothing but professional since the incident, but Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a wall between them. Each day, when their paths crossed in the office, Kyle would offer a polite greeting, but Maya would only nod in acknowledgement. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. He knew she wasn't fully comfortable yet, and that was something he had to work on. He wasn't looking for a quick resolution. What mattered to him was that he was making progress, step by step. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging meeting, Richard, the CEO, asked to speak with Kyle privately. As Kyle entered Richard's office, he couldn't help but feel a slight nervousness creeping back. Even though things had been going better, there was always that lingering doubt. What if he hadn't done enough? What if Richard thought he was still unfit for the job? Richard greeted him with a smile, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "Kyle," he began, motioning for him to sit, "I've been keeping an eye on you lately. I've noticed the effort you've been putting in not just in your work but in your interactions with the team. I want you to know that I see it." Kyle felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you, sir," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just trying to do better." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I know. And that's exactly what I've been seeing, but there's one more thing you need to address." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Kyle felt his heart beat a little faster. This was it, the final test. Would Richard tell him to improve his relationship with Maya? Would he tell him to apologize again? "You need to speak to Maya," Richard said, his voice firm. "You need to show her that you're not just doing this for the company or for your own image. You need to show her that you understand why your actions hurt her. I'm not telling you to beg for forgiveness. What I'm saying is that you need to be genuine. She's been quiet, but she's watching. You've made progress, but if you want to truly move forward, you have to do this right." Kyle listened carefully, understanding the weight of Richard's words. He had been doing his best, but now he realized that this last step was crucial. If he truly wanted to show that he had changed, he needed to have an honest conversation with Maya, face to face. It was time to address the issue directly, to give her the respect and acknowledgement she deserved. After the meeting with Richard, Kyle spent the rest of the day thinking about how to approach Maya. He knew it had to be sincere. He couldn't just say the words and expect everything to go back to normal. The words had to come from the heart, and he needed to prove to Maya that he was genuinely sorry for what he had done. The next day, Kyle finally gathered the courage. He walked up to Maya's desk where she was quietly reviewing a report as usual. She looked up briefly when she saw him approach, and for a moment their eyes met. There was still that wall between them, but Kyle knew this was his chance. "Maya," he began, his voice calm but steady. "Can we talk for a moment?" Maya raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, Kyle, what's on your mind?" Kyle took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I just wanted to say that I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how I acted and what I said. I know that no matter how much I apologize, it won't undo the hurt I caused you. But I need you to know that I deeply regret what I did. I was wrong, and I took out my frustration on you when I had no right to." Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak immediately, and Kyle couldn't help but wonder if she was waiting for him to continue. So he did. "I can't change what happened," Kyle said, his voice sincere. "But I want you to know that I'm working on being a better person, both here at work and outside of it. And I hope that in time you can see that I'm not the person I was when this all started." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Kyle thought Maya wouldn't respond. But then she finally spoke. "I can see that you're trying, Kyle," she said quietly. "I won't lie to you, I was hurt by what you did, but I've seen the changes in your actions, and I can appreciate that. It's not just about saying the right things. It's about showing up every day and doing the work even when it's hard, and I've seen you do that." Kyle felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had feared that Maya would dismiss his apology, that she wouldn't believe his words. But she wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for sincerity. And for the first time, Kyle realized that Maya wasn't asking him to change overnight. She just wanted him to prove that he could be the person she knew he could be. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Kyle," Maya continued. "I don't need you to prove yourself to me, but I will say this, actions speak louder than words, and I'm watching." Kyle nodded, understanding what she meant. The ball was still in his court, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. Maya wasn't asking for him to be perfect. She just wanted him to continue showing that he had learned from his mistakes. As he left her desk, Kyle felt a sense of gratitude and determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road he was ready to walk. He had learned a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and the importance of earning trust. Maya had given him a chance, not just to redeem himself in her eyes, but to become a better person overall. And with that, Kyle knew that he would keep working, keep showing up, and keep proving that he was worthy of the second chance he had been given.